Hello, welcome everyone to day 4 of the Humboldt Opioid Summit. Greetings if you're joining us here for the first time, and welcome back if you've been with us earlier this week. I'm very pleased and honored to be hosting you all today. We've had some really great sessions so far this week, a lived experience panel on Monday, presentations from Dr. Candy Stockton, Wes Harrison, and Jessica Smith on Tuesday. And yesterday we heard from Dr. Christina Lasik, Dr. Eva Smith, and Dr. Tedeschi regarding strategies for tapering opioids and treating pain, as well as activities in Eastern Humboldt and efforts underway to address opioid use disorder. I was particularly struck yesterday by Dr. Eva Smith's framing of treatment success and the importance of cultural practice and recovery and care, and just in general, sort of the whole person approach that we've heard throughout the summit so far. As we're getting started today, I'd like to thank and acknowledge our sponsors for this session: RX Safe Humboldt, the Humboldt Community Health Trust, California AHEC, Humboldt IPA, Aegis, and the North. And I would also like to thank the planning committee that's been involved in taking this effort from an in-person conference to a virtual setting. And so Mary, Trisha, Candy, Rosemary, Rob, Patty, Carrie, and Lisa, thank you very much. Next slide. So this is I, Jessica Osborne, Staff Smith, the voice in your computer. I'm just really honored to be with you all today. I'm a member of the RX Safe Humboldt Coalition, the project director for the Humboldt Community Health Trust, which is a community-wide initiative focused on holistically addressing substance use disorder in Humboldt County along the prevention to recovery spectrum, and a member of the project management team. So while we are gathered together virtually, I know many of us today are located in Humboldt and Del Norte counties, and we wish to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral lands of many indigenous people: the Taloa Deni, Yurok, Karuk, Hupa, Wia, and many rancherias: Elk Valley, Resagini, Big Lagoon, Trinidad, Blue Lake, and Bear River. And we'd like to acknowledge these people as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We'd also wish to share a resource today, which is #HonorNativeLand. This is a land acknowledgement pledge that organizations can take to practice land acknowledgements as part of their convenings. Next slide. So it is important for us to name that the opioid crisis disproportionately affects Native American communities in Humboldt and Del Norte. We would certainly be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the historical trauma as well as policy impact that are contributing root causes of this. And at the same time, we really want to honor the leadership and resiliency of many of our local tribal communities and the important efforts that they have underway that are working to make change. Okay, so every single day that we've had a summit, we're doing a daily drawing winner. And to be eligible, you need to participate in the length of the session. So the daily drawing winner for yesterday is Sunny Epperson. Congratulations, Sunny. And if you would like to be entered into the drawing for today's summit incentive, please stay on through the course of the session today. I do want to mention that there are supplemental materials for the summit. They can be found at rxsafehumboldt.org on the summit webpage. You see that below, and we will chat that into the chat shortly. Also want to recognize that this session is going to be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, and we're currently also live on Facebook. So throughout the course of the summit, we are discussing difficult subjects, and from that, difficult feelings may arise. And so we want to make sure that you have resources to address those. Please reach out if you are in need of help. Below you can see the Humboldt County 24-hour behavioral health crisis line, as well as the SAMHSA National Helpline, and we will put those into the chat shortly. So today's session, if you've been with us a little earlier this week, has a slightly different format from our webinar before. We're actually in a Zoom meeting today to support a little bit more interaction among this group. So we are going to ask for your help in upholding the group agreements on the slide before you. We ask that when you're speaking, you exercise the step up, step back rule. So just creating space for everyone to participate. Of course, showing respect and kindness for yourself, for your colleagues. Recognizing that we're delving into some deep topics, we ask that you uphold this space as a safe one that is free of judgment. Certainly that you seek clarification as needed throughout the day today, and that you respect and honor each other's privacy when sharing stories. Just a few additional housekeeping items. You should today have the ability to turn your video on. When we get into breakout sessions, we're going to ask that you do that if possible. It's nice to be able to see faces, especially in this day and age. You entered this meeting muted, though you should have the ability to mute or unmute yourself, again, especially when we hit the breakout sessions. We ask that you use the chat feature to reach staff. So I'm Jessica, and you can chat me. You can chat the RX Safe Humboldt Coalition in the chat, which is our IT contact Ming. You can chat Patty Torres or Carrie Escudero. And then you can see a few additional features there on the image in your screen. So there's the mute, unmute, start video, and on the far right is the reactions button. And sometimes it just feels good to put a thumbs up or a party hat in place. So please feel free to use those functionalities liberally. Again, so that's the chat functionality where you can receive some support if you need it through the course of the meeting, just clarifying things about CME, any of the technical functionality. We are here to help. I also will mention that on our Summit webpage, there's a sort of more detailed contact list if you need it. CME and CEU are available for this session. Applications have been submitted with the American Academy of Family Physicians and the California Board of Nursing. We do ask that you complete CME and CEU evaluations by no later than 5 p.m. On Friday, October 23rd. There's a link on our Summit webpage. You will be receiving an email with the link, and we will also be putting it in the chat. Okay, so today, the subject of our time together will be addressing stigma and embracing empathy and addiction response. We'll be hearing from presenters Elizabeth Morrison and Trisha Cooke. So I'm very pleased to introduce Elizabeth Morrison. She is the CEO and principal consultant of EM Consulting. You can see from her slide there that she has deep experience in developing effective and sustainable efforts around integrated behavioral health. She is an expert in motivational interviewing, and she provides research-based training in MI and other empathy-based communications for healthcare professionals. As a practicing clinician for over 25 years, she continues to see patients in integrated settings and maintains an on-the-ground perspective of what works in practice. Trisha Cooke has worked with federally qualified health centers for 19 years. We actually heard a bit about that earlier this week, and has spent another 10 years in instruction in higher education. She is a graduate of IHI's Improvement Advisor Program and worked with a number of provider offices across our community on topics related to system transformation, change management, and patient-centered medical homes. Ms. Cooke is also a certified trainer with the Institute of Healthcare Communications, particularly around programs about treating patients with care and the empathy effect. She's also the director of education at the North Coast Clinics Network. So Elizabeth, Trisha, welcome. We are delighted to have you here today, and we look forward to learning from you. Over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I just want to, as I'm looking at everybody's name as you're popping into the room, I want to say hello again. There are some names I recognize. And for those of you that I don't know or haven't met, it's really nice to meet you. And I really am appreciative of you taking the time to come to this summit and to our particular workshop. I don't take it lightly, just in terms of how we choose to spend our time. It seems like for me, and probably for some of you as well, it seems like working remotely and working in the pandemic has increased how full my plate is. And when I talk to other colleagues, it seems really similar. So I'm honored that you're choosing to spend some of your time with Trisha and I today. Next slide, please. So this is because of the CME that Trisha and I don't have anything to disclose in terms of relationships. And next slide. These are the learning objectives, again, for the continuing medical education. Next slide. I just wanted to say that we have until 2, which feels, I bet, like a chunk of time. And we are going to break out 2 different times during this session so that you can talk to each other in smaller groups, in groups of 3. So if you are on the computer and called in for your audio, if you can merge those 2 together, we'll make sure that when you're split into groups, your body is not disconnected from your voice. And if you have any trouble with that at all, you can chat into the team just to let them know, and they can walk you through this as well. Next slide. I saw as the slides, as people were coming into the room, I could see the slides that there was the Humboldt Health Cast. There was a picture of that on one of the slides too. And I independently, unrelated to those slides, also put an image of this here. And I just wanted to share to all of you that I know Trisha, of course, is in your community. I'm in the Central Valley. I love Humboldt. And when I first answered the call about doing this workshop, the team told me about the Humboldt Healthcast, which I didn't know about before. And so since that time, which was a few months ago now, I've listened to a number of the episodes, and it's so inspiring and invigorating. And especially right now, I feel like just the focus on the positive is really uplifting. So I would encourage anybody who hasn't downloaded it to do that and to subscribe. And the other picture you may recognize is the Eureka Airport in the rain. And I just wanted to say that the other times I've been up in Humboldt have been around working at Open Door, doing some work up at Open Door. And I too have had a flight canceled a few times because of rain. So I feel a little bit a part of in that way. But very honored to be here with you all. And I just want to also say thank you so much to the team that is putting on this opioid summit. I told Trisha yesterday, I felt like we had a whole pit crew. It's how I imagine I would feel as an NASCAR driver, just because they're really such a professional crack team. And so thank you for all your support in this. Let's go to the next slide. So I feel like I keep adding to this slide. I sort of started, when the pandemic first hit and we all went to virtual, I was sort of building this collage of coronavirus sort of anxiety. And then I ended up sort of adding in, kids at home. Many of us have children at home that are doing school. My kids are just on the other side of this wall. I just went out there and, everybody's in their pajamas, and my son was trying to tell me why he couldn't do this particular thing. And I just had to tell him I couldn't help him and come back in here. And I know that for many of you, there's, we have a pandemic, we have the concerns about our loved ones. We have kids at home, a lot of us, and the fires for the last couple months. So I think I just wanted to acknowledge, I think if I could have added in sort of a snapshot of the election. We're also in the midst of this incredibly stressful run up, the last 14 days before a really consequential election. So it just does feel like a particularly heavy time. And I wanted to just take a moment and ask all of you if you can let us know how you're feeling. So if you want to go ahead and share this screen with me, Jessica, that would be great. Okay, I'll share my screen. So for those of you you can do this on your phone or you can do this on your computer. If you can go to menti.com, it's www.menti.com. And what you'll find is a screen that asks you just to put in this number, 4755949. And if you submit that, you'll get a word cloud invitation. And I made 3 blocks because I know all of us are not feeling one thing. So if you can write in 1 or 2 or 3 feeling words about how you're feeling right now in this moment, we'll get an opportunity to see how everybody who's on with us today is feeling. And those of you who are joining from Facebook Live, you can do this as well. You can go to menti.com, menti.com, and enter 4755949. So I'm going to do the same right now to chat in how I'm feeling, and we'll start to see them pop up. Yeah, thank you for everyone who's participating here in this. I can see grateful is really big, which means a lot of you are writing in grateful, and overwhelmed sort of just overtook it. So overwhelmed, yeah, tired, grateful, hopeful. I'd love to see the hopeful. That's wonderful. Exasperated. I see heartbroken in there. Yeah. Distracted. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Positive, rested, a lot of tired, and but then there's also rested there, which is great, and not sure, just not sure. Thank you for everyone who's willing to do that. It's sort of, Trisha and I wish we were with you in a large group and could sort of feel you and you could feel us, and just to be able to see how the group is feeling is really special. So thank you. I see alone too. Yeah, blessed to be here. Thank you. We can go ahead and go back to the slides, Jessica. So thank you for doing that. Love Humboldt. That's great. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Along the lines of sort of inviting you to share about how you were feeling in this moment, Trisha and I really would love to hear from you as much as possible during this time. So we have the chat open. Please feel free to chat in questions, comments, experiences. While I'm talking, Trisha's going to watch that, and so is the team, the summit team. And when Trisha is leading, then I'm going to be watching that. So please don't hold your questions, even though we will have time at the end for a discussion. We really want to hear from you sort of in real time. And if you'd like to say something, you can raise your hand on Zoom if you know how to do that. You can also take yourself off mute and say something. So please jump in. Let's go to the next slide. I wanted to just start with just a snapshot of substance use disorders in the US as sort of a big picture foundation for what we're going to talk about today, which is empathy and stigma. Right now, in terms of prevalence, the best data that we have shows us that 1% of us have opioid use disorders. So certainly some of us in particular communities can feel like that's a lot higher than 1%. And depending on our workplaces and what we're working more deeply in, it might feel like more than that. The best data shows that it is about 1%. It's a very worrisome, dangerous, for the 1% that do have opioid use disorder. Of course, we've seen, skyrocketing rates of overdoses and deaths, of course. Just in contrast, and not to lose sight of sort of the larger range of substance use disorders, nicotine addiction still has the highest prevalence of any substance use disorder. And it's at 13.7% right now in the US, so almost 14%. And nicotine continues to incur almost 5 times the healthcare costs of any other substance use disorder. So I just wanted to share that. Sometimes, depending on what we're working in and what we're reading about, we might be more deeply in other sort of areas of substance use disorder, and just wanting to sort of give the sort of big picture bird's eye view. Let's go to the next slide. 4% have cannabis use disorder. We do know that we've seen an increase in use since legalization. I think the jury is still out on whether we've seen an increase in cannabis use disorder, so addictive disorders with cannabis. So that's at about 4% right now in the United States. And then other drugs, including amphetamines, are substantially less. They're between 1% and 2% of the population. Alcohol use disorder kills more people every year than opioid use disorder and is about 9% of the population. This number can go really far up depending on what group we're looking at, different ways that we sort of divide up the population. For those of us who work in safety net settings, when we look into a Medicaid population, then we start to see it closer to 17%. And then there are populations where we see it lower. For young women, especially young women who are first generation Latinx here in this country, we see it go as low as 4%. So this one really varies in population, and 9% is right about the average. So about 1 in 10% of us. So for all of us on the call today, there's 5 of us who have an alcohol use disorder right now. Next slide. And then this sort of the really tragic big picture about treatment. And I know I have a master's in addictions counseling. I know that some of you are on the call are addiction counselors. So hi to all of my tribe in that way. And you probably live this all of the time, that less than 1 in 10 people who need addiction treatment get it. And it's much, much lower for people of color. So it's not even a 0.5 percentage point for people of color. So it just in contrast, if we look at those who get care for a severe mental illness, that's 5 in 10. So definitely not where we want to be with that either. Just in contrast though, addictive disorders are severely impacted by a lack of access to treatment. Next slide. So I wanted to just frame up what Trisha and I are going to be focusing on today, specifically within substance use disorders and the addictive disorders field. Now, when I'm sure when this slide came up, most of you, all of you maybe, are thinking, yes, of course. I think for those of us who are in the helping professions, for those of us who are doing, social justice work, for those of us who are in academia, for those working in mental health, primary care, substance use disorder field, this is absolutely elementary. And it's really a very profound truism in the helping professions that empathy is healing and that judgment, bias, and stigma are deeply, deeply harmful. So if you didn't already intuitively know this, yes, it's true that when you're talking to someone and you start to feel like they're judging you, it truly, really is bad for you. And in fact, when we think about judgment, negative bias, when we think about stigma, we really think about emotional harm and physical harm. So it's biological and it's also emotional. Next slide. I want to talk just a little bit about the research literature on judgment. And I use the terms judgment, stigma, and negative bias interchangeably. I think there are some meaningful differences for our purposes today in terms of what Trisha and I are talking about. They're really all in the same cluster, which is a collection of negative beliefs and attitudes and ultimately actions around a group of people or people with particular conditions. So what we know about judgment and stigma is that it deeply impacts access to care. It deeply impacts quality of care. And I think that we've seen a lot of data in the last 5 or 10 years specifically on this piece. And it is one of the biggest drivers of health outcomes. So we see really specifically that when people engage judgment, stigma, negative bias in all kinds of health settings, whether it's mental health, substance use, case management, care management, medical systems, that we see that health outcomes are significantly worse than when people are met with its opposite, which is empathy. Let's go to the next slide. So some of the reason that there's such a deep impact on health outcomes is that when we walk into a place, we might feel unwelcome. And if we feel unwelcome, if people aren't making a lot of eye contact with us, if people aren't making friendly, connecting talk, if people aren't chatting with us, if people aren't letting us know how long our wait's going to be, if we go into an exam room and somebody doesn't look at us when they're taking the blood pressure, if we pick up sort of an attitude of judgment, if we feel scolded, we feel unwelcome. And this makes all of us then stay away from care that we might need. So that's part of what drives negative outcomes. The other thing is that we tend not to self-disclose when we feel like someone is judging us. So if you just think about your friends, or maybe not friends, but if you just think about people in your personal life, we self-disclose a lot more to people that we feel certain aren't going to judge us. And we really manage and minimize our self-disclosures, particularly sensitive self-disclosures, when we feel any semblance of sort of judgment. And so if you think about that in a health setting, any sort of helping profession, then the minute that, you know, somebody picks up that we have judgments about them, anything about them, then they're going to alter their self-disclosures. So this is, I'm sure we all have stories of this, but I am a recovering person, recovering from alcoholism. And whenever I go to a new dentist, they always give a health history form, and it always asks if there's a substance use disorder history. And particularly with dentists who I don't know very well and they're new, and particularly if I feel like the front office is not super friendly, then I just don't check it, because I just think to myself, you know, I don't know how they're going to receive this. I don't have total trust that this is just going to be received as just regular health information. Like, is it not going to be possible for me to get pain meds if I have to get my wisdom teeth out? You know, I just don't know. So I just choose not to self-disclose. And so we're all doing this in our lives and in our own care as well. And people are doing that with us when they come in. So it's one of the things that really affects outcomes is people don't disclose as much, and then we can't provide a good quality of care. And the third one is probably the most painful one. And that's that when we have judgments or bias, or when our systems have practices that are judgmental or stigmatizing, then treatment is actually different. So that sort of statistic that I think a lot of us have heard about, people who have severe mental illness dying 25 years earlier than the general population, that isn't, you know, when we weed apart all the variables, I think when that first came out, there was this tendency to say, oh, maybe it's, you know, there's a higher level of nicotine dependence, maybe there's a higher level of substance use, or their self-care is not as good, et cetera. And when all those variables were controlled for, it really just came down to the fact that they were treated differently in terms of clinical care. When they sought clinical care, they were treated differently and they got a worse quality of care. We know this is also true for Black women in pregnancy outcomes for the infants and for moms. That, you know, there was this tendency when it came out that there was this massive disparity that sort of, you know, maybe it had to do with people who weren't taking care of themselves in poverty and sort of all of these other things that had sort of a racialized component. And when we control for every one of those variables, what it really came down to is the treatment in the room was different. So those are some of the drivers for the outcomes. Next slide. So I do want to say that there's a couple meta-analyses about stigma from a public health perspective, because we can think of stigma and bias, negative bias, as a public health problem in terms of its impact on people's health. That stigma toward those with addictive disorders is increasing. Over the last decade, it has increased. So the same report, which I'm happy to share with anybody who would like that. In fact, any of the research that I talk about today, I would be happy to share with anybody. Please email me if you'd like to see any of that. In the same report that assessed this, we saw that stigma for mental health disorders, mental health conditions, was decreasing over the last 10 years. So that's really good work. I think, a lot of people probably on this call have been working toward that. It's really positive. And the really bad news is that the very thing that makes the, access to care worse and quality of care worse is actually increasing over the last 10 years for people with addictive disorders. Next slide. I wanted to talk just for a couple minutes about where stigma and bias and judgments come from. We're going to talk for a minute about sort of individually how we come to them. I wanted to just sort of point out or share that just in general in our country, we have a culture that's very punitive towards addictive disorders. So we sort of have 1 or 2, 3 ways of addressing addictive disorders in our country. And one of them is fear. This idea that it's, you're going to die if you keep using, that it sort of feels like sometimes it's the only tool that we have, that we just sort of batter people with. And there's been a lot of research on using fear for behavior change, and it's wildly ineffective. It doesn't sort of stop, though, that it seems like that's sort of as a culture where we first go to let people know there's going to be these horrific consequences. And I think everybody remembers, everybody who's my age remembers, like, this is your brain on drugs, during the Reagan years, and very unsuccessful public health message. Didn't actually alter behavior, but we still seem to just stick around in that, sort of hoping that will work. The second one is punishment. We're no surprise, I think, to many of us, we are in a really, really punitive country. It's one of the reasons why we have the highest incarceration levels of any westernized country, that we seem a little bit punishment obsessed. And so people with addictive disorders are punished harshly: jail, prison, probation, CPS. There's a lot of punishment around it. And I think that there's sort of this cultural hope somehow that punishment alters behavior, which it doesn't. Punishment also doesn't alter behavior. And the third one, the sort of third sort of string that I see often is shame. So I do a lot of work with women who are pregnant and women who are using substances during their pregnancy. And often when I get them, when they're actually in front of me, I feel like I'm having to repair a lot of shame interventions that have been directed at them, that's made them very defensive and hesitant to disclose what's really happening, understandably so. So this sort of sentiment, like, you need to think about your kids, and you need to think about your baby, and how could you do this? And if anybody grew up in a family, maybe I grew up in a family that used sort of shame as a way to try to manage behavior. So, I thought you were better than that. And those are all sort of shame interventions. But these three this trifecta, I think, of ineffective ways of interacting with addiction are very present in our culture. Next slide. So some of you who are here today may know that there's been an enormous amount of research just in the last 5 years on stigmatizing language. So just in thinking about how stigma, bias, judgment drives our language, and then how our language reinforces stigma and judgment and bias, These are sort of a few of the words that we know actually increase negative bias. They increase judgment, they increase stigma. And in fact, there's been so much research showing now that when we use the term addict, when we use the term abuser or drug abuse, that judges recommend stronger, longer prison sentences, that even treatment professionals end up, recommending harsher or longer treatments. We know that in primary care, when people use these words, that they're less apt to be referred for treatment and more apt to be discharged from the practice. So there's an enormous sort of research base now. And now I was just telling Trisha that there's a petition now from a number of addictive disorders and addictive disorder treatment groups that are petitioning the government agencies like SAMHSA and like NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, to change their names, to really heed this research and change their names. I just want to pause for a minute. I got a chat privately that says, how do we push the hospitals to include stigma training for staff? I was in the ER Monday and can't say enough about how much they need it. I was only treated with respect after they found out where I work. Yeah, thank you so much to the person who shared that with me. And I really appreciate you using your personal experience, because I feel like one of the reasons I feel so sort of connected to the subject that we're talking about today is because it's something that I can relate to in the work world. And it's something that I can relate to in my personal life too. I think many of us have had experiences like this, where we've really felt judgment and stigma, and can feel sort of what happens to us, how the care is actually changing, and what we might not want to come back, or we might not think to call them. I remember taking my son when he was little to an urgent care because nothing else was open, and his pediatrician who we love, it was a weekend, etc. And we took him to an urgent care, and he had a terrible diaper rash, so much that he had been just screaming. It was just, heartbreaking, the way it is when one of your children is in pain. And there was a PA, it was really an unfriendly place, and sort of didn't feel warm in any respect. And when we got into the exam room, the medical provider looked at his bottom and then looked up at my husband and I and said, "You're giving this kid sugar drinks, and you've got to stop giving sugar drinks." Of course, we'd never given him sugar drinks, but even if we had, it was such a humiliating experience that when we left there, we vowed never to use urgent care again. And when I look back and think about a decision like that, like, it's a big decision to say you'll never use urgent care again. We both said we will never go to someone outside of his pediatrician again because it was so painful. And of course, we didn't get the care for him that we wanted either. And so it impacts how we make decisions in care. I want to say just a couple things about the term drug seeking, street drugs, high utilizer. These are words that are really common even in documentation. Some of you might, work in places where you're looking at other people's documentation. I myself, there was a time where I used some of these words. And so I definitely don't think of myself as sort of a word police, or here I'm telling you all of these things because you're doing this and I'm not. I've come to sort of have to change the words that I use too. I mean, I'm a recovering person, I'm an addictions counselor, and I was using the term dirty UA up until 6 years ago. And it was when someone came up to me after a presentation and said to me, "Hey, I know you wouldn't want to say this on purpose." And she was very, very kind and said, "This is really stigmatizing, just the term dirty. We don't say that for someone who tests, like, their urine tests positive for like a UTI, an infection." And so I thought, yes, oh my God, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I grew up in sort of really early addiction treatment, and we used to use that term. So just really being careful for ourselves and really thinking about the words that we use, because they're really powerful. Let's go to the next slide. So in addition to kind of this overall sort of comment that I was making on sort of the culture in the United States, of course, we all have judgments and biases, negative biases that come from all kinds of different areas. My all of us, I think, can probably identify from our family, culture, religion, school, social media, of course, peers. So let's go to the next slide. I wanted to just share an example. This is my dad. I grew up in Alaska, so that's my sister and I. That's where we were born. He's from Scotland, and moved up to Alaska a long time ago, before it was a state, actually, and was a laborer up there for some years. And he had really bad alcoholism and died of cirrhosis later. So a lot of my ideas about alcohol came from him. Like, I always did believe that someone could have alcoholism and work. Some people sort of have that piece where, you know, if you to really have a serious addiction or alcoholism, then you're obviously not working, or because he always worked. So I always had that piece. That's probably positive and helpful in a way. I also grew up believing that alcohol was not a drug, and that drugs were something different and super bad. Like, alcohol was sort of, you know, the least stigmatized substance, and everything else was much worse. So I had to grapple with that in my early adulthood, my early years as a helping professional. I had to sort of grapple and become aware of that, and really work to change it, to consciously change it, to keep myself from then conveying that to the people I was trying to help. Let's go to the next slide. And Trisha's going to share.
Yeah, so I can remember back to the late 80s, and I was kind of in my preteen years, and watching the movie Colors with my parents. And that was one of the first, as Elizabeth and I were prepping for the presentation, and just kind of thinking about, you know, where did all of our biases kind of come from, or what was one or two that we could think of. And this just really stood out to me, because I remember sitting on the couch, and here were these two white police officers battling the gangs of LA. And so it started to set up this paradigm of, you know, police are always right and drugs are always wrong. And then, you know, through the lens of my young mind, the drug dealers, this racial attachment to drug use also started to be formulated. You know, drug dealers were Black and Hispanic. They valued status and power. They hung around all day long, you know, never a solid day's worth of work, which is influenced by my Catholic and Irish upbringing. And they had these epic parties. They had these schemes to hide their trade. And if they didn't get what they wanted, they used physical force and violence to get it. And so this was the picture for me of who sold drugs and who used drugs. And it took years for me to realize just the impact of this movie and how it shaped my biases regarding drug use as well as race. And in the end, you know, I walked away in those early years with this idea that substance use was regulated to people who were Black and Latino. It was a problem for people who lived on the other side of the tracks. Substance use and addiction happened to people who basically had a weak will, you know, because otherwise, why wouldn't they just quit? And so as I got older and I started to be exposed and meet people who did use drugs, I would kind of feel my body tightening up and wondering, why is my body tightening up? And then I would realize, oh, I'm taking this experience, this image that I had as a child, and putting it on this person right in front of me. And so it's something that I feel like I have to keep present in my mind at all times.
Thanks, Trisha. If you can go to the next slide, Jessica. So this is the first time that we'll break out into groups of 3. We are going to give you 10 minutes total. So it's about 3 minutes per person. And Jessica will chat into your breakout rooms about when it's time to switch. And we're asking if you can just share anything that comes to you about what we're talking about when we talk about sort of our own negative biases and stigma, judgments about substances and addictive disorders. Please share, of course, only what you're comfortable with. That's what I wanted to whenever we're sharing, we're asking you to share something personal about yourself. So just to the level that you're comfortable with, if you can just identify an experience that you felt like shaped your ideas about this, and then hear from the other two people in your group. And then we will see you back in 10 minutes. So you can go ahead and do the breakout groups now.
Great, thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Vanessa Verdiak and I'm just
Welcome back, everybody. I see people hopping back on. I see this too. Good to see you, Jonathan. People may be still finishing up.
Yeah, they should be coming back now, Elizabeth. 15 seconds left.
If you want to go ahead and share the slides, I'm going to hand off to Trisha. Hi, Rosemary. It's nice to see whenever I see somebody's face, like, oh, hi. Good to see you.
Yes, I see Patty's just rejoined and she will reshare the slides.
Great. So I do, welcome back, everybody. I see people coming back on. It's fun to see people's faces. So hi, Vanessa. Hi, Mandy. So Mary, great to see everybody. Thanks for doing that. I just want to, Jessica, to make sure you saw, I wasn't able to turn on my video due to the host. So I'm gonna let the pit crew take that one. Tracy, thanks for letting us know.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Thank you everyone for doing that. I'm gonna turn things over to Trisha.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So we're gonna jump in, Elizabeth, kind of let us through just the impacts of stigma and judgment, the importance of empathy. And so for kind of what we're calling the second half of our time together today, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what does empathy actually look like as we're working with each other and interacting every day, both personally and professionally. And I think we can all agree, and as Elizabeth shared, that judgment is harmful, especially for individuals who use drugs and may be in vulnerable situations. And sometimes that judgment can be elusive, existing in our implicit biases, those biases that maybe we're not even aware of yet, or maybe we've never thought about until today when we went into that breakout. And really, it's that commitment to reflect that I think is the power of empathy, to acknowledge that we have those biases, to be open to explore them, and to just explore the negative consequences of them, and really come to a point where we see empathy as a part of treatment. It is treatment in and of itself. I've spoken and worked with many folks, both in the healthcare profession and outside of the healthcare profession. I've been one of those people that have said, I don't have time for empathy, or I do not have any more to give. The bucket is empty. And so I just want to start to, and I've done this for myself, to reframe that empathy is not more. It's not separate or removed from treatment, but is an integral part of it. And we now have decades of research to show that empathy is as important to improving health as any medication, any test, or any intervention. And in fact, treatment without empathy can be harmful. Two studies that always stand out to me in this realm is one that was done in 2005. Werner and his colleagues led a study looking at patient-provider interactions where women were seeking care for their pain. And Werner found that the instances where empathy was not present, that the women felt blamed, they felt judged. They were essentially either walking away with the idea or actually being told it was just in their head. And when they looked at the actual physical pain thresholds of these women, where empathy was not present, their pain scale actually went up. And conversely, when components of empathy were in that interaction, we saw that pain was decreased. And so that combination of the medication or the intervention and that empathy really has an impact. Another study looked at where people who were alcoholics drink, that when there was treatment or when there was empathy in their treatment, or excuse me, when there wasn't empathy in their treatment, the patients actually drank more. And so their disorder actually got worse because those elements of empathy were not present. So before we move on into the next slides, I just wanted to highlight kind of three main other points, and that is to create a distinction. I think many times when we think about empathy, people might associate or define it as giving in or being a doormat or caring too much. And really, empathy is self-care. It is setting boundaries and limits and saying no. I often have to remind myself of this when I'm stressed. So just recently, my son got really upset and angry. And my first reaction was I wanted to scream right back at him. I wanted to be right in that situation. And I had to remind myself to take a breath and that I can set a boundary with him and not be unfilling or uncaring about it. I can actually do both in the moment. And in having empathy for him, I'm showing myself care because I'm both creating space for him and I'm also creating a healing space for myself. And I'd also like to acknowledge that empathy is not easy all the time. Sometimes we're tired, we're frustrated, we're feeling overwhelmed. We've been there, a day where you woke up late or your schedule is double booked or someone was screaming in your face. And again, we go back to that place of feeling like that bucket, that well is empty. And it's in these moments that we may feel like empathy is more, and that's completely normal. And the good news is that if we can push ourselves to see empathy as a healing practice, the empathy that we show others can be a battery to recharge ourselves. Much like the practice of gratitude, the act of displaying empathy can actually shift our physical and our mental state. It's triggering our brain and our limbic system to produce chemicals that actually make us feel happy, calm, and refreshed. And the last point that I'll make before moving to the next slide is just that empathy, like the practice of medicine, we have it in our very language. It's a practice of medicine. And empathy, in much the same way, is a practice. It's a learned behavior, it's a muscle. And as we use it more, as we kind of commit to being mindful, it will get easier. And at first, it will feel uncomfortable and it'll feel frustrating. But I truly believe that if we persevere, then it gets easier and more natural. Next slide, please. So when empathy is present and used as a treatment, individuals disclose more. They feel a sense of safety. They feel a sense of trust. They feel like you are taking them as that solitary individual at that moment, right then, right now, and you are valuing that. And so the reward then is that we get to learn more about that person, and the more that we know, the better able and better equipped we are to actually help them on their path to health and wellness. We also see increased adherence. They feel supported. They feel like they can do it because they see what they have a person behind them that understands them, that is affirming the choices that they're making to help themselves. And then that physiological healing. They've looked at when empathetic behaviors are in interactions in healthcare, we can actually see the body, the blood pressure lowers. Folks have lower cortisol levels. Their anxiety is decreased. And in getting those emotions that sometimes are sitting really close right in front, acknowledging them and validating them, then folks are able to kind of move to the next phase beyond them. And so Elizabeth was going to chime in with some of the great research on this topic that she also wanted to share.
Yeah, I wanted to share one really interesting study that I find myself sending around a lot. And I've renamed the PDF on my desktop, and the name of it is Addiction Treatment Unconditional Love. Um, Part of the reason that it's such a valuable study is it's a meta-analysis of brief intervention for alcohol use disorder. So it's not just one study; it's an analysis of a lot of studies. The other reason is that William Miller, co-founder of motivational, or co-grandfather of motivational interviewing, is one of the primary authors on it. So there's all kinds of sort of richness to it. And they went through in this very, what you would consider just this very traditional way of analyzing all of these different research studies. And what they found was that there wasn't a variable that could explain when the brief alcohol use disorder intervention was successful. They couldn't tie it to a model. They couldn't tie it to how long. They couldn't tie it to whether it was phone or in person. They couldn't tie it to a philosophy, CBT, MI. And so the conclusion of this very academic paper is that the one variable that it looked like was sort of a through thread for all of the successful studies was unconditional love, essentially what we're referring to as empathy. That it was really what the practitioner was able to convey to the person in front of them, which is trans theoretical and trans model and trans method of how we're, communicating. And so that one's super interesting. And we also have lots of studies on wound healing, which I think is really interesting. Just all by itself, because it means that like the body is actually healing faster just because our stress hormones are going down and we're healing faster. So I think that's really interesting too, because one of the studies that was in that meta-analysis was actually people with substance use disorders who had been hurt or in car accidents and had wounds as a result. So I feel like that piece is really interesting too. So yeah, thanks, Trish.
Thanks. All right, so let's dive in a little deeper. Next slide, please. So there are many different skills and strategies to employ when we are using or trying to use empathetic communication. And so we can see on the slide here several that we can use. So for instance, normalizing. And so with normalizing, we're conveying that a situation is not uncommon. And it's meant to support the individual in recognizing both that they're not alone and that the way they feel is not something to be ashamed of. So an example of normalizing might be, relapse is so common. This is a really tough disease. Or gosh, making changes in our lives is tough. So it basically just creates a situation where we start to merge together that box, that kind of us and them, or that idea of normal and your addiction is not normal. And we start merging those two things together to really show folks that they aren't alone and that this is something that is that can be worked through. The other one is open-ended questions. And these are questions to help us find out more from that individual about their specific experience in the world. And of course, with an open-ended question, what brings you in today? We get more information versus a close-ended question where we might be asking a yes or no question. And sometimes in healthcare, especially, we are actually trained, right? We have numerous checklists and diagnostics, and it's yes, no questions all the way through. And so kind of emphasizing to ourselves the value of using open-ended questions to help us get to know the people that are in front of us. The next one in the background there is acknowledging feelings. And so when we acknowledge a person's feelings, we are validating and honoring their experience that they're bringing with them. And even more, research shows that putting feelings into words helps an individual manage, process, and regulate their emotions. So we're actually triggering, again, that limbic system and allowing it to process the emotion, ultimately creating a space for that person to move forward. And again, going back to, I have an 8-year-old son, and he, is doing the virtual schooling right now. And he was asked by his teacher to write about his favorite holiday, and he wanted to write about his birthday. And when his teacher said that that wasn't a holiday, he erupted like a volcano. And so at that moment, of course, my first response was, get back in your seat. You're in school. Do the right thing. But instead, I stepped back and just asked him, hey, Mal, I just want to check in. Like, what are you feeling right now? I see a frown on your face and I see you clenching your fists, and I want to check in to see if you're okay. What are you feeling? And once he was able to say, oh, I'm really angry and COVID stinks and I can't be with my friends. And then I was able to reflect back to him what I heard him saying. And I just said, I feel you, buddy. Like, not being able to go to school and be with your friends is really frustrating and it sucks. And I think that we just have to, that's what it is. And let's see what we can do. And from that point, as I was talking to him and as he heard himself say his feeling that he was experiencing, and then heard me reflecting it back to him, there was this calm that started to come over his body. And then from that point forward, we can kind of jump to solution. And so the other kind of important component with empathetic communication is that we're taking a moment to recognize to be present to the space that we're in and acknowledge that before we kind of jump in to the solutions. And so that leads us to the two topics that we're going to spend a little bit more time diving into, which is the empathetic reflection and affirming. Next slide. So empathetic reflection. Empathetic reflection is essentially actively listening and reflecting back to the person what we think we heard. So as we all kind of experience on a day-to-day basis in communication, there's kind of the speaker and then the person that we're speaking with. And so sometimes, even though, if we remember that game of telephone, even though you may say a message, that message could translate in 1,000 different ways to the next person in line. And so one of the goals with empathetic reflection is to make sure that we are hearing the message, what that person is intending for us to say. And then secondly, reassuring that person, like helping them feel heard. Many of the folks coming through our doors to see us as patients are coming from pretty hard situations, or coming from situations where they feel stigmatized on a daily basis, or where they never feel heard or acknowledged just as a human being. And so giving that gift to that person of taking the moment so that they can feel heard is of huge importance. So when we're practicing empathetic reflection, we are being present in the moment. We're not thinking about, what am I going to have for dinner? Or, oh, I've got to pick the kids up at 3. We're listening carefully. We're listening for feeling words. We're listening for, what is that person's world? What support systems do they have or don't have? What resources do they have or don't have? And we're dropping our agenda. We're not focused on, this person is coming in for, let's say, their diabetes. You need to exercise more. You need to smoke less. You need to do this. We're not going through our checklists of what the best practices are, but we're actually figuring out where that person is at that current moment. And we're also not making assumptions or, again, focusing on the solutions that we'd like to get to. there was a great article in the Journal of General Internal Medicine that examined 112 interactions between patients and health professionals. And when a patient was asked, "Tell me what brings you in today," the patient was interrupted 11 seconds after the question was asked. And that was 67% of the time. So the question get asked, 11 seconds later, the health professional continued the visit, sometimes even interrupting the patient that was there. And so I bring this up not to blame or shame us in healthcare, but to highlight how easy it is to fall into that trap of feeling rushed, or falling into our routines, our checklists and what we need to get accomplished in that visit. And sometimes, we may feel like taking this extra step is actually going to take more time. And in essence, and there's actually studies behind this now, that show that when we take the time to listen and to reflect back what we've heard, we actually save time. The clinical encounter is markedly shorter because of that. And I always go back to something that a mentor had told me years ago, and he had said, listening, like truly listening to an individual, is the greatest gift that you can give them. And so I hold this ideal close to me because I know through my heart, through both folks that have listened to me, and just seeing the impact when I do it for others, that it builds trust, it builds respect, and it creates the beginning of that healing interaction. Next slide, please. So what does empathetic reflection look like? So when we have kind of been present and we've actively listening, and then when we're reflecting back, there's several different strategies that you can use to reflect back. You can use the individual's exact words. So this individual most likely said, "I'm at the end of my rope. I can't take anymore." So simply just using those exact words, that you're at the end of your rope. Sometimes I find this the most effective in my personal experience, just because I've been in situations where I've tried to substitute a word and haven't necessarily gotten it right, and it actually accelerates the situation. And either way, we can always self-correct. So even again, this idea of practice, even if we don't get the message right the first time, kind of keeping our wits about us, for lack of a better word, keeping our body language and our tone of voice and everything when we don't get things right, and trying again and say, okay, so it sounds like I didn't quite get it right. Could you tell me again? Is a perfectly acceptable space. So we can use the exact words. We can summarize what we think we heard. They also may not have used any sort of feeling words or ideas that kind of can distill down into a short word or phrase. And so we can do our best at summarizing what we think we've heard. So it sounds like you've had a really stressful year. And then there are different word stems, like the one I just used, it seems like, or I hear that, or what I think I'm hearing is, to kind of help us kind of reflect back what we feel that the person has said. And so the idea here is we're going to listen, we're going to reflect using one or a couple of these strategies. And then the idea is to just pause before we kind of jump in again to solutions. Let's deal with the space that's right there, and then we can go on to finding solutions, but really honoring that present space for that individual. Next slide, please. So the other strategy is to affirming strengths. And so when we are affirming strengths, we're noticing and amplifying a person's strength. Some call this strength-focused language. And so this is such a powerful technique. And the idea here is really to be specific and sincere. So I think a lot of us do a really good job on kind of being cheerleaders. We say, good job, nicely done. But when we can really hone in on a particular element, um, like if a patient shows up with all of their medication list, saying to them, I really appreciate and want to acknowledge for how organized you were for bringing in your medication list today, and just be, valuing your health so much that you brought this list with you today. Or if you have a patient who shares with you that they had not been using drugs for, let's say, 3 weeks, and then they used yesterday. You might say something like, I'm really impressed that you were able to not use for 3 weeks. That must have been pretty hard. And thank you for the courage in sharing that you used yesterday. I can see that you're taking your recovery seriously, and I appreciate that you felt comfortable disclosing to me that you used. And then pausing before we kind of get to the rest of the story. Some other little word stems there you can see at the bottom of the screen. I'm so impressed by, I can hear how, I'm amazed at that, and I'm inspired by. And one key thing as well when affirming strengths, so that it does have a very consistent and congruent message, is to be very attentive to our tone of voice and our body language. Because if our words and our tone and our body language are not aligned, the message is going to come across very insincere. Next slide, please. So, let's be honest, there may be times that the empathy bucket may feel quite empty. And so Elizabeth and I wanted to equip you with some strategies to bring yourself to a place of empathy when it may not be that you're feeling it in the moment. So it's easy to be empathetic when things are going well, and it can be more difficult when we're feeling tired or frustrated or struggling to feel a connection with the person in front of us. So one of the first strategies is to set an intention. And so when we set the intention, I have this great story from I was doing the empathy effect training, and a clinician shared with me that he was struggling. It was about 3 p.m. in the day, and he could tell that by the end of the day, his empathy was gone. And he could see how his interactions with patients was harder, that he wasn't having a successful time with his patients. And so we talked for a while, and he had shared, well, I think I'm going to try to, before I go in the room, I'm going to stand in front of the door, and I'm going to put a smile on my face, and I'm going to just kind of set that intention that I'm going to give this person the best of me that I can give. And then he would smile, and then he would walk through the door. And so I checked in with him a few weeks later, and he goes, Trisha, it was amazing. He's like, the first week, it was a little hit and miss, like it didn't really feel sincere, but he's like, then all of a sudden it just was this natural thing. I would stand in front of the door, I would put the smile on my face, and I would say, okay, I'm going to be the best that I can be. And I would walk through, and I've had the best experiences with patients. So just merely setting that intention sometimes can reshift us into that space of empathy. And so I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. She has a great example for the next one.
I really enjoyed the chat. I just want to point out, Tracy said, I love the affirming strengths. I need these for when I get out and start seeing clients to encourage them to continue on their journey in a healthy manner. Lisa wrote, I agree. I just want to say one thing about that, which is I have a 16-year-old daughter who hates math. And it was like, I went through this phase where she was always like, I hate math. And I would be like, well, you gotta do it, and like all my therapist skills, poof. Or, she would say like, I'm not ever gonna use this. It's like so ridiculous. And she started developing these really sophisticated arguments about how it's taught and how it's hierarchical. And I would just say, well, you just got to do it. Or like, all of these unskillful responses. And I started doing this thing with her where I would like put on my strength glasses and I would listen to her, and then I'd take a breath and I would say, you know what? I'm super impressed that you actually sit down and do that homework every week, given how much you hate it. Because I started to realize that is impressive. Like I wasn't just faking it. All of a sudden I was like, geez, like, I'm lucky she does it, and it just changed like the whole dynamic. So I'm a big fan professionally and personally. So the middle picture, just in terms of strategies to get us into that place that we want to be in when we're with our friends and family and with clients and patients that we're helping. This is a strategy that some of you may do naturally, and some of you might have been taught it in your education or schooling, which is to picture the person in front of you as a child. So sometimes when people are in front of us and we have some judgments, if people are mad at us, our empathy tends to go down. If people are very demanding, our empathy tends to go down. If people show a sense of entitlement, like there's certain things that as humans we're like, I don't like that. So if we sort of realize that that's happening in the moment, one strategy that works for many of us, I use it all the time. This is my little brother. He's 48 now. This is him when he was a kid in Alaska, school picture, 2nd grade or something, is to just in that moment, imagine them as a small child. It tends to awaken our empathy in the same way that small kids do, and in the same way that like animals do. It wakes up that part of ourselves for us to remember that this is an innocent human being doing their best right now. So the reason I used his picture, I was telling Trisha that I sometimes use this with him. He's prickly, he's sarcastic and prickly, and I love him and value my relationship with him. And sometimes I toggle back and forth in this way to try to respond in a way that grows our relationship.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And then the last strategy is to just let go of the agenda. Sometimes we may have in our heads what this person should be doing or how they should be acting, or we may have our agenda as far as I've got 15 minutes. I need you as the patient to stop talking. I have no empathy left. And at that moment, just saying it's okay to let go and to practice. I always find myself when I have to let go, there's kind of like, I want to be right. And so I have to say, it's okay not to be right, and kind of put myself into that mindfulness frame of just taking a breath, doing a quick body scan. Where am I holding that stress? And when I acknowledge that it's on me, and I take that breath and I do that body scan and just kind of bring myself back to center, I can be present in the moment with that person and know it's going to be okay, because ultimately it will be. All right, next slide, please. So we've come to our next breakout. And so for this breakout, we would like you'll be in groups of 3 again. And the question that we would like the person who is going to share first, what is between you and happiness right now? And so when you get into your groups for that first round, the person will be the person sharing, and then you'll pick a person that will do the reflective listening and affirming strengths. And then the third person in your group is going to be an observer. So the 2 people, the person will share what is between them and happiness right now. The listener will reflect back and affirm a strength. And then after that encounter, we encourage the observer to just share, what did you notice about that interaction? What did you appreciate about what was shared, or how the person listening affirmed a strength or reflected back to that individual. So we'll do 3 rounds in the time that we have, so that each person has an opportunity both to share and to practice the skills of empathetic reflection and affirming strengths. So each round will have about 5 minutes. And this one thing I want to encourage everyone is to pick something real and something that you're comfortable sharing. So kind of balancing those 2 things together so that we can have a real experience, right? Not just this kind of artificial, I'm doing this because she told me to kind of experience. Because we would like you to get the most out of this time. So, and then in the chat, just in case folks are nervous, we will post the question, what is between you and happiness right now, along with the 2 skills that we'd like you to practice of the reflection and the affirming strengths.
And Jessica will also chat into you when it's time to switch. You'll have just about 5 minutes per person, like per interaction. So
with that, I will send you off into the breakout groups.
See you in a few.
Hi everyone, my name is Patty Torres. I'm a project manager for the Humboldt IPA and the North Coast Health Improvement and Information Network. And this is the RxSafe Humboldt Opioid Summit update presentation on the North Coast Resource Hub. So thank you so much for watching. I'm excited to just dive right in. So many of you may have already heard about the North Coast Resource Hub. We have been working to promote it through a variety of channels. But for those of you who aren't familiar, the North Coast Resource Hub is an online, mobile-friendly community resource guide. So we have a variety of community services, social services, and some medical services. And we designed it so that it can be easy to use for social workers, care navigators, or case managers that are working with clients to quickly find resources that work for their clients. So we heard at a variety of tables that, we know that there's a lot of resources in the community. Sometimes it's hard to know what people qualify for, understanding that there's a variety of eligibility criteria at play sometimes. So it's useful to have a tool that can help you find those resources quickly and help you narrow down to what best works for the people that you're working with. The target population initially started out as pregnant people with or at risk of substance use disorder because funding came through the Humboldt Rise project through a grant from the Wellbeing Trust. And so we started working on this resource with that population in mind and have since started to expand to include the broader population. As I mentioned, the Resource Hub was created out of a need that we heard from lots of well-meaning service providers out there about how sometimes, people have a lot of knowledge about resources that exist in the community, but it's not set in a resource that is easily accessible. And so even though, in the community, there's a lot of great resource lists that already exist, sometimes it's useful to have a little bit more in-depth information as far as eligibility criteria and population served and things like that. And so that's what really we were trying to achieve with the Resource Hub, is to provide a little bit more information and to make it really useful for the user. Just a quick recap of the timeline. So we were awarded the grant in 2018. This was towards the later end of 2018. So in 2019, we began the process of collecting data. We began building the skeleton of the resource hub, if you will, by designing just what features it would have. And we also did a robust discovery phase where we talked to a variety of partners to find out what sort of features would be most useful in the resource hub. In early 2020, we began testing it out by asking our partners to use it and to give us some feedback through a short survey, just so that we can understand if there's anything that we needed to tweak before we did a broader push. And in the summer of this year, we were fortunate enough to partner with RxSafe Del Norte to expand the North Coast Resource Hub to Del Norte County and Curry County, Oregon. So that has been wonderful, because we're happy that we can expand and bring this tool to people who live in Del Norte and in Curry County. So a little bit of what's to come through the end of the year. We are working on making this more available to the broader community. So we're working on a variety of marketing materials so that hopefully this is something that is easily accessible for the community to use. So what makes it different? Again, like I mentioned, there are lots of really wonderful people out there who work hard on creating resource lists. But what sets us out from those is that we try to go a little bit more in-depth information. So we collect data on referral processes. We have the ability to link to referral forms or to intake forms. We capture what languages are spoken at any given resources, if there's any fee associated with them, if they're a medical service, do they take insurance, if so, what kind. And we also have the ability to rank different services based on different criteria. So if you have a client that's located in Crescent City or in Arcata, there's ability to search by that, or by population, such as people who are pregnant, veterans, students, Native Americans, and there's a couple others on there too, which I'll show you in a moment. So this is my contact information. Again, I'm Patty Torres. Here's my email and my phone number. Please do get in touch with me if you have any questions, or if you manage a program that you would like to see represented in the Resource Hub. We're happy to add those at any time. So please let me know. And I will do a quick demo of the Resource Hub momentarily. So what happens immediately when you click on the link, or when you type resourcehub.engine.org, is you will see a screening come up. So this asks if you are in need of urgent or immediate help. And so if you click yes, crisis services category automatically comes up. And so what this shows is a variety of resources that either offer crisis services or crisis hotlines. So there's a variety of lines here that are meant to be helpful for people who are in immediate need of support. I'm going to remove that filter, and now we're at the just regular home page. Before we look into the resources a little bit more, I wanted to show you here at the very top right, there's the ability to change language, which is something that we are very proud of, and our programmer, Taylor, who's a rock star, she did the whole page, so she deserves credit for everything, but this in particular, I'm very happy with, because it's such a need in our community to have services available in Spanish. So if you select any of those languages that I just showed you here, I'm demonstrating Spanish. The translation, even though it's an automated one, is actually very high quality. So if you're working with people who speak Spanish or any other language available on Google, there is the ability to look at these resources in that language. So I'm gonna head back to English. Another thing I wanted to show you that's one of the newer features is this button right here towards the left that says share/print. If you click that, you are then able to check these boxes that say include and share. And I'm just going to demonstrate what that does. So as you click the boxes, they come up here in this column to the left, and you have the ability either to print them. And so if you're working with someone who doesn't have access to the internet or a smartphone, you're able to print out these services in this way. And so what this shows is a brief description of the service with an address, a website, and a phone number. The other thing that this does, and I will click that same button once more. If you select some resources and then you click copy link, this automatically copies into the clipboard, and then you are able to send this link via email, and it will email your client only the services that you checked off, or if you're using a mobile device, you're able to text this link, and in that text, these resources will come up, the ones that are in the selection. So that's just another feature that's used to be able to facilitate the sharing of these resources. So now I'm going to go into the filter column here to the left. And so as I demonstrated earlier, we have a variety of broad categories. So if you scroll down here, you can narrow down your search by broad category. I'm going to select addiction services here. And so if you click subpopulation, for example, for pregnant people, this, again, it doesn't filter out anything. It simply ranks them in order of number of matches. Here we have services that provide addiction services, serve pregnant people, and take Medi-Cal. So if you look down here, it either has a website link that'll take you directly to that website, or you can click more details. And so here we have a broad description of the program. We have a map here. These very small blue icons will show you the bus routes. And if you further click on that, Google Maps will take you to the schedule. And if you're using this on a mobile device, you're able to just tap the address and the phone number, and then it'll take you to the app that will either call or pull up a map. And then more details on the services that are provided can be seen here. We are also starting to incorporate the ASAM level of care for each addiction service. And then if you click the detailed info tab here, just a little bit more in-depth information as far as the referral process, subpopulation served, whether or not there's fees for the client, if there's language assistance, and more details. I will go back to search results here. And this brings you back to that same list of services. And if you would like to narrow down even further, let's see, Crescent City, it further ranks for services that are in Del Norte County. And so if you wanted to expand your radius, you can do so from this drop down here. And so here you'll see those services that are available. Okay, that concludes the demo for the North Coast Resource Hub. We do have a snazzy new logo, which we're very proud of. I just want to remind folks to please call each individual service, because due to COVID, no one's back to regular work hours. So everybody's going to have some, different policies as far as in-person services or hours of operation, things like that. If you have a service represented here on the Resource Hub and there's been an update, please do get in touch with me. Let me know. We work really hard to keep this updated, and I'm here for any questions that may come up. Thank you so much for watching.
Hi, everybody. Jessica, if you want to stop share, since we're just going to be kind of in discussion. Hi, it's just so nice to see everyone. Trisha and I were in a little group just talking, and she was saying, like, as soon as like she saw everybody, she was like, ah, hello. It's really nice to see everybody. Welcome back. If anybody has video capacity and feels comfortable doing that, we'd love to see you. We don't have any more slides. We wanted to hear from you all. So if you can, if you're up for it, it's nice to see faces. So thanks for being willing to practice the empathic reflection and affirming. And we would love to hear from a few of you who might be up for sharing your experience, either with practicing empathic reflection and affirming, or being on the other end of it when someone was doing that for you, or as an observer. Any of those experiences we would love to hear about. Is there someone who would like to share?
I will.
Great, Lisa, thanks.
One of the things that came up in our conversation was how hard it is to deal with COVID this year. And it's not just one person, it's everybody, and the things that go along with it, and trials and tribulations. When you throw in on top of that, the fact like a death in the family, and losing a sibling, and just different things like that. Not being able to hug your mom, especially in the beginning when it was so terrifying to even I couldn't even go near my mom. And so COVID has made an impact on not just that, but on my job, and which leads me to a point where I get afraid that they're going to just close down the department I work for with the county, and what are they going to do with me? What's going to happen to me? I don't know. So I have fears around that. And it can be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, really uncomfortable. And I can see a lot of nodding while you're talking. You started out giving the baseline, like there's COVID, and we're sort of all at this baseline, and then you add on to it deaths. You add on to it not being able to hug the people that we love, and then you add on to it economic insecurity, job insecurity. It's a lot. I'm curious, Lisa, when you were sharing this, was your partner able to reflect or affirm?
Well, we had kind of on this last one of them I didn't have a video. We didn't have video, and we had one person who didn't have the mic. So we had our challenge with that, but we managed. And yes, we all related about stuff like that.
Well, just in this capsule, I just wanted you to know, Mary, I see you. So we're going to have Mary share next.
Yes.
Lisa, you sort of encapsulated just in sharing about the technical difficulties to connecting. And you also described your group as just going forward anyway and connecting any way you could. So
like we've all had to do this year.
Thanks for being the first one to share, Mary. Not Mary, Lisa. Thanks for being the first one to share, because I think it takes some courage to just jump in. So thank you. Thanks. Mary?
I just wanted to say I had this observation after we were finished, and I wonder if other people did too. It's probably, it's hard when you're responding not to drift into the sort of offering solutions thing. And it felt okay being the receiver of that. It did not make me feel unheard. And it's not surprising when so many of us are in healthcare or social services. We're in this conference today, and we're doing the work we're doing because we usually want to help the person that we're sitting with. And it's sort of an extension of being empathic. But I'm wondering if, the discipline of empathic listening might have something to say about trying to stop short of that.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mary. I think you're so, for me, I relate when you're saying that we're in the helping professions. It's an extension of wanting to help, to share solutions. So just to let you know, I almost chatted into the chat right before you all went out to say, no matter what, don't give any advice. And I didn't. I usually do that in person in workshops. And I think Trisha normally does that too. And I didn't because I just felt like, it's a breakout. Like, we're not in person. I didn't know if it would sound too kind of bossy or something. And of course, you said beautifully why is it's not that the motives are good. The only reason we would offer solutions is because we want to help. And there is a discipline around not doing that, like a discipline of pausing and reflecting back, affirming, maybe using other, skills to let someone know we really heard them and that we believe they have their own solutions too. That we trust that if we can kind of continue to elicit and let them know we want to hear more, that they'll also get around to telling us what they've tried and doesn't work, what they're thinking of trying. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you. I want to open up just a little bit wider, just for the few minutes we have left. If anybody else would like to share about any of your experiences in the breakout, we would love to hear that. On a broader level, if anybody would like to share anything at all, sort of comments, experiences, questions, would love to hear about anything that we've talked about in the last couple hours.
I'll go first real quick. Thank you. I just wanted to reflect back to seeing people as children, because at one point we all were children. And one thing we talked about in our breakout session is having compassion for that former version of yourself, the 3-year-old and the 5-year-old. I don't know if anybody else listens to the Adult Chair podcast, but I love the Adult Chair model, and that the idea that all of those versions of ourselves still live within us, and sometimes they come out and trying to be in your adult chair when as much as possible. But one thing that I always think about is having compassion for that former version of myself and trying to have the same amount of compassion and empathy for the current version of myself too, because she deserves it as well. And so does the future self. That's why I make sacrifices now from the future self, but by exercising and trying to eat better and all those things, because I want to have the same level of compassion for future me and current me as I do for 3-year-old and 5-year-old me, because all of those versions of myself deserve it. So that's my little take. Thank you.
Irina, that's really profound. I saw Juliet like with a big heart right there. Really felt like it sort of hit me in the heart too. Thank you for saying that. And you turned this conversation where we were talking about primarily about our ability to effectively convey care for others, and are really pointing out that it's also about how we treat ourselves. Everything we talked about can be turned just like that to how we treat ourselves and all of our previous selves. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much.
Somebody else like to share? We probably have time for one more person. I don't know if it makes people nervous when we can see you, because I'm not like, I won't call on people. Just want to know if anybody wants to say anything before we end. How about you, Trisha? Would you like to say anything in closing?
I just am in awe to see so many people today. Elizabeth, you set us off with that intention, and I'd just like to thank people for sharing the time and being willing to go into the space, because it can feel a little vulnerable and uncomfortable. So, and I'm just excited to see, I have workshops, and sometimes people are voluntold to go to an empathy workshop, which is like the worst. But here are all these people that volunteered and wanted to come. So I just thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Great to spend this time with you. Wish we were in a room with you. Wish we could hug you. So good to see everybody. We'd love to get feedback on evaluations, super helpful, any kind of feedback. So we appreciate anything you want to share.
And Jessica, you'll be closing us out. You had a couple items before we adjourn. Okay.
I will. Thank you. I didn't want to step on the toes of your wrap up, which was so lovely. Patty, could I have you share the screen? Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. It's been such a privilege to listen into this session, and just I'm really moved by what Irina said at the end there, sort of holding compassion and empathy for yourself, which in turn, and all versions of yourself, your past self and your future self, which allows you to do that for others as well. So thank you so much, Elizabeth and Trisha, for bringing this forward today. And thank you to all my colleagues on the call for participating in this. I know our community will be better for it. Also, thank you for your resilience through some seemingly technical challenges in the background. Much appreciated. I do want to remind folks that evaluations for the overall summit are due by 5 p.m. on October 23rd. There is a link to that in the chat, and we'll put that in again very shortly. It's also on the summit website page, and we will be sending out a link via email. Next slide. If you were on Facebook Live today, you got a preview at length of some of the postcards from the field, as well as a couple community recorded updates. If you were on the Zoom meeting and you want to check those out on some downtime, there are the links in which you can find them, and you can also find them through our Facebook page. We've been posting links throughout the week. And finally, I just want to forecast for everyone. Our summit wraps up tomorrow. It's amazing that we are at this point. It's been a week of incredible content, just really great lessons learned, incredible and robust community participation. And I know tomorrow will be the capstone. We'll be hearing from Dr. Mary Mings, Dr. Candy Stockton, and Marianne Hansen on the relationship between ACEs, resiliency, trauma, and realistic steps we can take all together for a brighter future for our community. So please register for that session. If you have not yet, you can do so again via our RxSafe Humboldt Summit page. And with that, thank you all so much. Just appreciate your time today, appreciate the material we covered, and go forward and be good. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.